Hello, everyone. My name is Camille Chamy, and I work at CAD Center. We are the local Graphisoft partners in Eastern Canada. Today, I invited Aaron Bourgoin, Design Technology Coordinator at Architects Alliance, based in Toronto. Aaron will talk about his work at Architects Alliance. They do large projects, and he will also discuss the workflow challenges that this size of project entails, as well as that the success that they had using Archicad. So, without further ado, here's Aaron introducing himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Bourgoin. I work at Architects Alliance here in Toronto. Camille asked me to say something about myself and the path that has got me here. My first step into an architecture office was January 4th, 1978, where I was asked to come and help a team by labeling drawings. I've got to say that I spent 5 months in that office at their encouragement. I went to school in Halifax and Montreal. I entered university at the start of the 1980s recession and left university just in time for the 1990 recession. The fluctuation of our economy has had a deep impact on what my career path was. For a period of time, I was self-employed, like Camille, as an AEC consultant. I worked actually selling Archicad in Western Canada and the Arctic for almost 15 years. And in the course of that, I encountered people using Archicad in the most interesting ways, from log home designers to single and multifamily residential developers who were building 1,100 units a year on, beautiful Alberta farmland. I've also worked in architectural practices, of course. This first project that I worked on that I mentioned went on to be the one and only Governor General's Medal recipient that was a shopping center. I'm also happy to say that as I looked at Canadian Architect in December, that 3 of the 4 firms that I've worked with in my career that are still in practice won awards this year. And 2 of those, I would also like to say, are Archicad firms. I moved to Toronto in 2015. I made a move to make a complete change in my life to a large city. So I've been here now. I'm in my 9th year. I'm enjoying every minute of it. My experience at Architects Alliance, I came originally to start work on a template. I was invited to stay on and was told that I wasn't going to do any Archicad stuff. I was going to be thrown into the deep end of the pool and be a project architect or a project team lead. And so I have 2 projects under my belt. And about a year and a half ago, I assumed a new role, which we call the digital technology coordinator. That has me in an interesting situation because I feel like it draws very much on my past experience, forces me to be very much in the moment every day. My present and my presence makes for an intensive and full-on day. And the other aspect of this, of course, is to be continually looking to the future. This was the image that we gave to Camille to speak about ourselves, and it is a piece of the Toronto waterfront that is just east of Yonge Street. You can see the Toronto Star here is at the bottom of Yonge Street. And I just want to point out that as we move along, if we take a different look at that waterfront, you can see that the development is extensive and intense. And if you look at the pieces of yellow band here in this image, these are projects that we are directly involved in or have done. It staggers me to think that Peter Clue's firm, Architects Alliance, has been working in this town for a very long time. And as I thought about what I was going to present today, I thought I would speak a little bit first about the city we work in primarily. We work in other jurisdictions to be sure, but Toronto has certainly been the locus of most of our work. And the way we work is directly impacted by planning initiatives that are both provincial and municipal in nature. So Toronto, over the course of the past few years, has become encircled, if you will, with a green belt. I won't get into all the politics of that, but just to say that as the green belt has expanded, it has really set the stage for what we do and where the most intense, what we'll call intensification activity is going on. So these areas in black are essentially pieces of the city where we primarily work, because they are defined by the city as, or by the province rather, as growth centers. Then the other thing that I am really fascinated by as essentially an outsider to the city is that the Greenbelt plan came into effect in 2005. The policies that were enacted there were taken up by the City of Toronto, but the City of Toronto has yet to produce a comprehensive zoning bylaw. So if I go back to this and just use this as an avatar of where we are working primarily, the thing that I want to point out to you, if you're not like us working in this crazy city, is that essentially every site that we work on is site-specific zoning. And so every single project, it might be argued, is in part, or it starts very much as almost a master plan. We do primarily multifamily residential work and have for a very long time. And so there we add to the matrix the pro forma numbers of our developer clients. What this means to me is that any one of our projects might have a cradle to commissioning lifespan of 10 years. That brings its own challenges to the use of Archicad, which is, of course, is updated every year. So, we have projects in the office that are current now that were originally started in Archicad 11. So we take very seriously the issue of migration, what gets migrated. We were not always signed up for subscription or forward, and therefore the firm tended to skip versions. But having adopted the subscription model, we have to look very carefully at what we do and how we do it. Let me just try and go quickly through some images to give you some examples of work we've done over the years. And as they say, Peter Clues bought 3 copies of Archicad in 1991, which would have been Archicad 3. He did so at a time when his firm, by virtue of that horrendous recession, went from 23 people to 3 people almost overnight. The firm has been involved and engaged in the city, producing built work and engaging in a dialogue about what gets built and how it should be built. This is a piece of Toronto in the West End that is divided by railway corridor, transit corridor. So we have developed projects in precincts like this, as well as the waterfront, this being one that was completed about 6 years ago. It skirts that railroad corridor, and in my mind is actually one of the most handsome projects we've produced. About the time that I arrived, work was wrapping up on this site called the Canary District, which was initially developed with buildings that were erected to serve as residence or service buildings for the Pan Am Games in the summer of 2015. We did this site, which is now a George Brown University residence, but at the time was in part a hostel for Pan Am athletes, as well as a medical center or a first aid center. And as this site grows out. This is kind of the state of it at the time of the Pan Am Games. All of these sites are now filling in, and we have been lucky enough to do a number of them. This is a project called Pier 27, which has had many phases to it with some really peculiar architectural treatments. If you look to the right here, this is a sugar plant. And so this particular unit, which was the first one, and it's worked its way west, actually has a wall that completely forms a barricade between the sugar factory and the rest of this residential development. We also developed a site, again, close to that railway corridor that I showed you before, which was the redevelopment of an old automobile factory here that is now taken over with the art gallery, a contemporary art center. And in the course of doing that, we also looked at more infill projects in that neighborhood, including this residential complex that went alongside it. This is not being built, but that whole precinct has continued to develop as a neighborhood, and that as the result of or part of the work that we did with the art center. In this group of images, this is the last one, and this is a project not far from there that we're doing. We'll come back to some of this perhaps later.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about Archicad and your workflow. I'd like to ask you, how do you develop the projects? What are the different phases that you go through? And can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. As I said before, our projects have a very long lifespan, and what will start as a sketch model from any one of the senior designers is quickly brought into service to examine basically the pro forma of the project for our client. The first step is usually a rezoning process. As I said, every site acquires its own site-specific zoning bylaw. In some cases two, but that's a story for another day. So the process of that has to be quite fluid, because almost without exception, our projects and our project files have to be set up with a view of working as a presentation vehicle, a very much a fluid design vehicle. I can't emphasize that enough. While the design is in flux, it's having to respond to the numbers game. It's having to respond to, in the case of all of these residential projects, unit design, and what follows from that is the client's marketing strategy. So while at any given time, we're responsible probably for at least 3 different sets of documentation. And I might illustrate that just by looking at a layout book here in our template, where basically our template is kitted out to handle everything from schematic design to construction documentation.
So you have one single template for all your projects?
Yes, and it is a challenge. And one of the biggest challenge is actually, again, the length of time, because if we make the decision to migrate a project, we can migrate everything but the view map, for those of you who are using Archicad. So it is this that poses a challenge. Very often, though, we're looking at, are we going to evolve the existing model, or are we going to start from scratch as we bring it into a newer version? I can't say that we have a uniform strategy for that. We have to really consider the steps involved. I mean, some of the projects you've seen flashing up on the screen are multi-tower developments, which bring their own issues. Our approach is typically very much one of an iceberg method, which, if the term is unfamiliar to you, it's where we assemble typical elements below grade and hot link them into the project. And so that typically a project is going to remain a single file for as long as possible. Multi-tower projects require multiple files like this that feed into a larger master or coordination piece. But what works for us, keeps us fluid, is working inside a single file.
Interesting. And for anybody who wants to know more about the iceberg, I can send him the documentation about it. So you do your schematics through your original template, and then
Yes.
you export them to do your presentations. Do you use BIMX? What tools are you using for your presentation?
Presentation is in large part diagrams, sketches. And give you an example here, and I won't run through this whole thing, and I just can sort of flash through it, but this was a project that did start as a master plan. It was a shopping center, a large shopping center in a community close to Toronto called Pickering. The city was involved, and the owners of the mall were involved. It had the master plan had housing as well as public space in the form of a library, a performing arts center, parkland, etc. And so, as you might imagine, this was the master plan was developed from a single model, hived off into its various components. But that project went a very long way in single files through, client approvals, the city approvals, the testing and design development. So in the case of some of these buildings, this was the library, for example. There are pieces of the master plan here as well as presentation material. All of these renderings were done in Artlantis, and I would say if we were doing the project again today, we would be doing these directly inside Archicad. We've worked harder since this project was active at refining our use of the rendering engine inside Archicad.
Interesting.
But all to say that all of this stuff was really driven by single models and small teams. At the height of this project, there were 20 people in the office out of 80 working on this project.
And so, Aaron, once you've done this proposal, which looks quite intricate, you start the construction documents. How do you? Can you explain a little bit on the process that this entails?
I'll just go back to the template, and we can. I'm happy to talk about this a little bit more in Q&A. But
of course,
as I say, our template reflects how we present the work with views that are preset and feed into this. Like any firm, we have an order of drawings, and where possible, we work with standard details. One of the things I want to try and get to before we go to Q&A is to talk about some of the things that we're working on that are some of it's prototype, some of it's very much a work in progress. But like all firms, we're looking to improve our productivity. And the great thing about finally this is generation 2 of our template. It was first developed for Archicad 25. We started working on a template for 26. And then when we saw what was in 27, basically made the decision that we wouldn't even roll 26 out at all, and that we would advance the template. This template goes live to the office next week. But as you can see, anyone can enter the project at some point and adapt it. We have publisher sets for the various bits of output that we produce, include BIMX as a preset, these are all published to predictable locations and are not changed by any of the users, so that people can find things predictably, and no one likes surprises, put it that way.
Of course. So this is a way for you to standardize the way that everybody works in the. Can you give me an idea how many people are working on Archicad at Architects Alliance?
Yes, we're a firm of about 65, and there are probably 50 people at any one time.
Okay, so
working.
Everybody is standardizing on through the template on the way that they work.
Yes, and of course this is necessary.
Yeah.
Without our own template, we would be severely challenged. So we go about that with a combination of, or inside this template are a collection of hot linked stories from a document where we maintain basically elements as standards. And so this particular sheet functions almost like a palette to pick things up from and use. For every element in here, there are also favorites. We're looking to expand this now with the options manager tool to look at module files that would be, for example, complete stairwells, elevator banks, with using the option tool to let us house different configurations, say of cores from one file. And that where we're finally getting to, and it's taken us a very long time, I must say, but where we're finally getting to is having a template that serves the needs of our front-end conceptual design people, as well as people doing design development construction documents.
I got a question from one of the attendees. How do you manage stories on large projects like these?
Stories are a challenge because in a single tower, there's no problem. When you have multiple towers, chances are that each one will have its own story structure or floor-to-floor height in tower or podium. And that really necessitates the use of multiple files, simply because I've watched someone in the office work for a frighteningly long time on stair drawings, only to discover that the projection settings in the main model where the documents lived completely fouled up all the work they were doing. So
interesting.
Every single project, comes with its own quirks, but we will not hesitate to split the file as early as we can where we have multiple towers. It just makes everybody's work easier. One of the examples of that I can show you is a project that we're working on now called Quayside, which is, if any of you recall, Google set about to develop a piece of waterfront Toronto in this precinct. This L shape was the site of the original Google City, and when they decided to pull the pin and get out because of all the criticism, a competition was held to rethink the site, and one of our largest clients won that. So what you have here is a project with multiple towers. You have a project that has multiple architects as well. So this tower is Alison Brooks in London. This 12, 13-story timber structure is David Adjay's New York office. Henning Larsen in New York and Copenhagen are doing this. The landscape architect is likewise in Copenhagen. That adds to a lot of the work that we do is collaborative. And I use the word collaborative first, as opposed to, say, being architects of record. There are projects we work on where the contractual arrangements are very much design architect, and we are architects of record. But as architects of record, we're familiar with the ins and outs of the city, with density, with the client's expectations for housing mix, et cetera, et cetera. And in some cases, that collaboration extends into the conceptual design realm. So at the moment, I can't show you images, but at the moment we're working on 3 contiguous sites. This is the one that I can show you, and the other 2 are both due east of this at the waterfront. So it makes for really interesting times, and we have to find ways to collaborate with our design team members, just above and beyond the interesting ones that happen with engineering consultants.
Yeah. Before we go into engineering and consultants, Aaron, how do you manage? Like, this should be a very huge file. How do you manage to deal with such files?
This project has a federated Rhino model because the bulk of our exterior architects do not touch Revit until design development. So our coordination work is via DWGs, and the comparison of we maintain a model in tandem with them that we build in Archicad, but we coordinate that work with typically in the case of this project, which is not uncommon. We're taking this project, which exists in that office as a Rhino model, and just trying to we'll hot link this in for a time, or find ways and means to honor the design intention, while at the same time saying some of this isn't going to work, or so the back and forth process is a fascinating one.
But coming back to the other project, the model on Archicad, how big is it, and do you face challenges with the size?
We have the biggest project or the biggest file in our office is probably about 12 gigabytes. It's for a single tower. It's been part of that is baggage that accumulates over the span of years. That's a project that we've been working on for 6 years now. Another one that we've worked on for a similar length of time is not much smaller than that. I confess that ideally those files would be half the size, but in some cases we're in for a penny, in for a pound, and what's left of our fee, and how do we get it to the finish line? Ideally, a comfortable size for a project, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say 4 gigabytes is something that our computers, which are iMacs with 32 gigs of RAM in them, can handle easily.
Good. But if you find yourself with such a large project, do you segment it into smaller ones? How do you manage that?
That would be a strategy. And, again, depending on the project, one go-to would be to develop a building envelope model.
Okay.
As an example. As we work more and more with the engineers, we are splitting those projects or publishing IFC files from those projects in 7 separate files. Wow. So there's a building envelope, our version of the structural model, interior partitioning and appliances, millwork, site grids, all the geolocation and internal stuff. Anyway, we will typically break that up into 7 files, especially when that work is happening in construction phase.
Great. Aaron, I have one more question before we go to the Q&A. How is it working with, because you have to deal with consultants, and the consultants don't necessarily use Archicad. How's it going doing the coordination with external resources?
As you might imagine, Revit users are uh, risk averse because they're engineers. They tend not to read manuals, and the term IFC is foreign territory for them. But
Okay.
we basically guide them along. We have very few issues with that now, simply because we guide them along, and we also go back and forth until our translator is properly set up for what they want to do. There's a misconception perhaps among Archicad users that an IFC file is an IFC file. IFC is a really interesting beast, because the translators that you can employ might be one that produces a very simple model of the whole project to a very granular, now with IFC4, almost to specific building materials. And we'll see more and more use of that. So far it's working, but it works because we will not have a thing to do with Revit.
Okay. So before starting the project coordination, do you sit down with your consultants and try to set up some standards on how you will be collaborating?
Yes. And, in public projects, that might actually take the form of a BIM execution plan. I want to say that the office is doing BIM, or we're getting closer to doing BIM. But see, in a BIM standard, like a BIM execution plan and what's commonly called level of detail, in the new CAD standard 19650, the term level of detail has been dropped in favor of level of information need. And I think that's a much better definition of what it is we're trying to do. Our projects are highly articulated facades that the term level of detail is irrelevant. It doesn't work for us. In residential development with our clients, we are not a prime consultant. Our client hires all of the consultants.
That's interesting.
And so all of these contractual arrangements that work on institutional or public project, it's a hard sell to gunslinging residential developers.
I'm going to start with some of these questions that are very interesting, by the way. So from Kennedy, how do you manage phased projects showing multiple phases in drawings? How they work together? Do you use layers, multiple files with a base file?
Yes, we used to. And I'm going to use your question. Thank you very much.
This is a great question.
Oh, it is. It's at the heart of our productivity, or the challenges to it. So this is a project that is phased, and this is in 25. So we've used the renovation filters to deal with phasing. We've also used, well, I hope I'll see them here, but certainly in other projects, we're using properties that are attached to or associated with zones to deal with phasing. And the reason I have this project up is that this project employs a prototype of what we're doing for project statistics. It's an amazing project as a prototype because it includes phases. But what we do is we basically do 5 data dumps out of that project. We do not try and get an Archicad schedule to do work, because basically it can't. We struck upon this one day where we said, okay, well, let's stop trying to get Archicad to do the work and let, in this case, a flat file database or a spreadsheet do the work. And we found this product called, it's from the CAD BIM guide. It's basically a template for the work that he does on his other products that are for estimating. But basically what you have, you can bring all of the data dump from this particular project, and then produce statistics simply by building the formulas in this. So what happens here then is on these stat sheets, these will appear as PDFs in our documents. So you have this kind of circle where we do, as I said, a data dump, and the formulas can query such things as phasing, etc. We can ask the information virtually any question we need to take the format. And then when we press print, that automatically, essentially what we do is we press print here, it republishes the PDF, and then back on the project sheet, these are the data ones. We let our spreadsheet do the cooking of the processing of the numbers, and keep our stats on a sheet current. This may not be the final version of what we do, but we very, very much want to have this capability rather than manually entering these values that we get from Archicad.
Thanks, Aaron. I'll try to squeeze in as many questions because we still have just 10 minutes. Do you work in teamwork for the majority of your firm projects?
Our projects get to teamwork pretty quickly.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they spend some time in conceptual design as a PLN file, but very often it's a team of at least 2 people working on any one of these projects in the preliminary thing, which necessitates teamwork. Well, let's say easily within the first 2 weeks.
All right, super. Why not use IFC file when collaborating with other? I think you do, but the question is, why not use IFC files when collaborating with others?
I'm going to say that we do. In the case of this Quayside project, that lovely filigreed tower of Alison Brooks that I showed, this one, they have actually now started in earnest on a Revit model, and IFCs are what's keeping us going back and forth.
Good to know. The next question: do you hotlink any Revit files by IFC within Archicad? So do you put the IFC directly into your architecture file, basically?
Yes, we do. Typically at a coordination phase. Let's use structure as an example because it's more simple. But basically, we have a graphic override that turns the Revit model red, and we're looking for clash detection. One of the things we'd like to advance going forward, given now that our consultants feel more comfortable with IFCs, is to use BCF format to flag changes rather than marked up PDFs. Okay. I don't know if we'll see the end of marked up PDFs in my lifetime, but I would love nothing more than to not have to deal with them anymore.
Next question. We have a project of a single family house, and this building will be built on different properties. We created a master file only for the building and hotlinked it in different other files, one of each property. Do you think it is a valid solution, or would you recommend to create only one big file with all the properties?
No, I think you're on the right track. Treat the building. You're going to be detailing the building, so have a file for that. Your site-specific issues should be dealt with in another file. So keep going the way you're going.
Super. Do you find you have any issues connecting to teamwork files? Do you use in-house server or BIM Cloud SaaS?
We have an in-house server. We're using BIM Cloud Basic. We would probably use BIM Cloud if we were able to host it on our own premises. At some point in the future, we may take some projects to SaaS. We had a look at it, There was no dramatic difference in speed. We have a pretty robust teamwork server. The problems that we have are in some corners of the office where the network cabling is older than in other spots. So we occasionally suffer from drop-offs or dropouts. We haven't had any fatal problems with that so far, but if we run into trouble, it's usually not the server as much, I think, as the age of the cabling.
So just to make sure, you guys have, you said some 50 plus people working at the same time, and then working that way. They're all working through the Vim Cloud Basic, correct?
Yes.
Great. Another question: how do you manage or hide the standards, presets, elements, etc., in your model views, elevations, and sections? The standards, presets, elements, etc., that reside on substories.
They exist in their own little domain. All the views, including anything that would be a preset 3D view, has filter and cut to exclude them. They're also hot links, and so they're on a master layer. There's a master layer assigned, a switch. In any of the layer combinations, they would not appear simply because the master layer would be hidden, which turns them all off. Like if you look at the view map here, these are cooked to activate them, basically.
Good, thank you. Okay, in terms of hardware, what's the speed of the internet connections?
We're gigabit Ethernet. We have a dedicated server for teamwork that runs both 25 and 27 and will not run more than 2 versions. We have all new switches in the back. Like I say, the thing we're looking at now is our CAT cable.
Okay. Yeah, you need a good backbone in terms of networking. Do you anticipate planning in terms of technologies for the future?
Okay. It may not be technology per se, but it is to exploit the things that Archicad has. As an example, parking stalls. It sounds crazy, but a parking stall is a piece of real estate that is not well handled by use of a zone. In terms of classification systems, as in IFC, etc., it's also a curious animal. We also work in multiple jurisdictions, and so what I have done that I'm kind of proud of was to develop a parking stall that is sized to any of the jurisdictions we're working in, including Halifax, how it's classified, who it's intended for, how it's serviced, how it's configured.
How did you do this, Aaron?
This is all pure GDL. There is no 2D line work in this at all.
Okay.
But the other thing that we did, that I did, we produced drawings where a parking stall is visible at anything from 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 50. Each one of those plan types, if you will, really has a different information need. So what I did was I created actually a set of model view options that let us configure those parking stalls view by view. And we've done the same thing for bike rack or bike storage and loading facilities. So it's three different parametric parts. The bike stall works similar, where you say, I've got this kind of a bike, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our schedules are driven out of those, and like I say, we get consistent graphic result.
How do you avoid over bloating your files using what type of tree objects would you use to avoid that?
On the subject of bloating in general, go immediately to your toilet object and look at the graphic resolution of that, which is set to 36. You're never going to render a toilet bowl. you can typically control the resolution or the number of facets in the part itself. We don't typically use a whole lot. I don't want to say a tree is a piece of entourage. That's unfair. But we would look for anything that's low polygon. Archicad, an Italian firm, produces vegetation that produces things that are renderable and are claimed to be low polygon. You might have a look at those if things in the Archicad library aren't sufficient.
All right. The next question, I think it will be the last one. Do you redraw structural elements in your model to match the structural IFC file you receive? That's interesting.
We always draw the first model, as you do probably as well. And yes, like I say, we will bring an IFC of the structure in, color it red, and look for the most obvious things. One of my challenges is to convince our structural engineers to see if we can't produce a structural analytical model that they can use, edit, etc., where we round trip structure. Again, it's one of these things where contractually or risk-wise, there are going to typically be two models and always two models. But in the world that we're promised that BIM is to produce for us, I'd like to stop doing work for the structural engineer that I'm not getting paid for. Not insult their intelligence, but they're always working two models, right? They have a Revit model for documentation, and they have an analytical model for all the design work they do. And I'd like to see if we can't work a little bit to close the gaps. I found an engineer that we work with regularly who seems interested, and sometime this year we'll get started on that as a project.
Interesting. Aaron, thanks a lot for your time. It was, I believe, very enlightening. Thank you for addressing all those questions too. And I would like to thank also everybody for attending this webinar, and hope to see you on the next one that we will be doing. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for coming today.
Bye.
Bye-bye.